Two rancher brothers protected a young Apache girl 18 years ago. Now she returned to marry them. The woman stood at the edge of their land right before sunrise, observing the house as if she'd lingered there for ages. Levi spotted her initially through the kitchen window. A shadowy outline that remained still, didn't shout, simply lingered. There was something in her posture that caused his chest to constrict in an indescribable manner. Nolan descended the stairs and froze, instantly upon glancing outdoors, his fingers clutching the banister so firmly that the wood groaned. Neither sibling uttered a word. They merely gazed at the form that shouldn't be real any longer. The one they'd spent 18 years attempting to erase from memory. She donned a gown far too elegant for such a rugged spot, somber material that reflected the faint dawn oddly, and her hair was tied back harshly and intentionally. But it was the mark along her chin that sealed Levi's throat shut. A slender, pale streak they'd both witnessed previously when it was raw and oozing, back when she was 8, and concealed in their stable as men with flames scoured the canyon. The woman advanced one pace, then a second. She proceeded like an individual who understood precisely her destination and what awaited her upon arrival. Levi's fingers reached for the doorknob before he even registered the action. Nolan seized his arm, digits pressing in deeply enough to bruise, yet he stayed silent. The guideline had remained straightforward since that evening. Never mention the events, never mention her. But there she was, approaching them as though the past 18 years were merely an intermission. She halted 10 feet from the veranda. Her gaze shifted from Levi to Nolan, then returned, and a change occurred in her features. Awareness, evaluation, something additional they couldn't decipher. When she eventually spoke, her tone was firm and distinct, laced with a sharpness fitting for a person who'd endured ordeals no one should. "My name is Tessa Boone. You once knew me by another." She brushed the scar on her chin with 2 digits. A motion so purposeful it must signify something. "I've returned to resolve the debt, and I've returned to select." Levi sensed his brother's hold strengthen on his arm. The sun was ascending at her back, rendering her a silhouette once more, but her phrases lingered in the atmosphere like haze. Select. The term didn't compute. Resolve the debt. None of it computed. They'd preserved her existence, sheltered her, almost forfeited all in the process, and she'd vanished with folks who vowed to transport her to a secure haven. That was meant to conclude it. But Tessa grinned then, slight and perceptive, as if she could interpret every notion exchanging between them. "You both sensed it that evening. Don't act like you didn't." She edged nearer still, and now they could discern her eyes plainly, deep and assured, bearing an element that resembled a verdict already formed. 18 years is sufficient time to bide. One of you will wed me, and I require your response before sunset arrives. The dawn breeze seemed too sparse. Levi struggled to draw a complete inhale. Next to him, Nolan's grasp finally released from his shoulder, but not due to easing strain. Because a graver situation had just commenced. The girl they'd safeguarded in her youth had come back as an entirely different being, someone perilous, someone who grasped precisely the impact she was inflicting on them. And the most dreadful aspect was the inquiry neither sibling could voice aloud. Why must the decision occur today? What pursued her this time? Levi was the initial to yield. He shoved by Nolan and strode down the veranda stairs, his boots striking the soil with intent. Each stride narrowing the gap between him and the woman who'd just ripped apart 18 years of quiet. Tessa stayed put. She observed his advance with those profound eyes that appeared to inventory all, the identical manner she'd scrutinized the surroundings as a kid. Always evaluating, always plotting endurance. "You can't simply appear here and declare such things." His voice emerged harsher than intended. "You have no idea what you're demanding." Tessa angled her head a bit, and the morning glow highlighted the scar on her chin once more. "I understand precisely what I'm demanding. I've had 18 years to contemplate it." Behind him, Levi detected Nolan's boots on the veranda stairs. More gradual, more cautious. His brother had forever been the prudent one, the type who pondered prior to moving. But Levi could perceive the strain emanating from him. The identical strain that was causing Levi's chest to feel overly constricted, as if his ribs had contracted during the night. "Where have you been?" Nolan's inquiry emerged softly, nearly drowned by the whisper of wind through the meadow. We believed you were protected. They claimed they'd deliver you to a place where nobody could locate you. I was safe. Tessa's gaze shifted to Nolan, and something in her expression softened just enough to be noticeable. They kept their promise. Sent me east to a school where no one asked questions about the scar or where I came from. I learned to read and write properly, learned how to be someone else. She paused and her hand moved to the scar again. That same deliberate touch. But I never forgot the 2 men who bled for me. Levy felt his jaw tighten. Bled was accurate. The night they'd hidden her, one of the men searching had caught Nolan outside the barn. Demanded to know if he'd seen an Apache child. Nolan had looked him straight in the eye and said no. The man had called him a liar and driven a knife into his side. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to make a point. Levi had carried his brother inside, while Tessa stayed hidden in the hay, small and silent and shaking. That was a long time ago, Levi said, forcing the memory back down. You don't owe us anything for that. I owe you everything. Tessa took a step closer. And now she was near enough that Levi could see the fine details of her face, the way time had sharpened her features, the way strength had settled into her bones. And I pay my debts. Nolan moved to stand beside Levi, and the brothers exchanged a glance. It was brief, but loaded with 18 years of unspoken understanding. They'd made APAC that night after Tessa disappeared with her escorts. Never mention her name, never talk about what they'd felt watching her leave. 8 years old and terrified, looking back at them like they were the only safe thing she'd ever known. Never acknowledge that something had cracked open in both of them that day. This isn't about debt, Nolan said, his voice gaining strength. You can't just decide to marry one of us like it's a transaction. Tessa's smile returned sharper this time. You saved my life. You gave me a future when I had none. Now I'm offering you something in return. She looked between them, measuring. Or are you going to tell me you feel nothing? That seeing me standing here doesn't make your hands shake? Levi's hands were shaking. He shoved them into his pockets before she could notice. Beside him, Nolan had gone very still, the way he always did when he was trying to control something too big to name. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the last of the morning cool. Tessa turned slightly, looking toward the barn in the distance. The same barn where she'd hidden all those years ago. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. I'll give you until sunset to think about it, but know this. I'm not leaving without an answer. And whatever you decide will change everything between us. She started walking toward the barn, her dress moving around her legs like dark water. I'll be waiting where you hid me last time, and maybe there's a solution none of us have considered yet. The brothers stood frozen, watching her go. Neither spoke, neither moved. The only sound was their breathing and the distant call of a hawk somewhere overhead. Finally, Nolan turned to look at his brother, and Levi saw something he'd never seen in his brother's eyes before. Fear. Levi turned away first, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too dangerous to spit out. He walked back toward the house with hard, deliberate steps. And Nolan followed because that's what he always did. Follow Levi, trust Levi, let Levi make the hard calls. But this time, Nolan's feet felt heavy, like the ground was pulling him down with each step. Inside, the kitchen still smelled like coffee and bacon from breakfast they hadn't finished. Levi grabbed the coffee pot and poured himself a cup, his hand steady now. Too steady. Nolan recognized that control. It was the same control Levi used when he was trying not to break something. We need to send her away. Levi's voice was flat, final. Give her money, horses, whatever she needs, but she can't stay here. Nolan leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed tight over his chest. She's not asking for money. I know what she's asking for. Levi set the cup down hard enough to make coffee slush over the rim. And it's not something we can give her. Nolan pushed off the doorframe, taking a step closer. Or you? Levi's eyes snapped to his brother's face. And there it was. The thing they'd never said out loud. The thing that had lived between them for 18 years like a ghost. They both pretended not to see. Nolan watched his brother's expression shift. Saw the careful mask Levi always wore start to crack at the edges. Don't. Levi's voice dropped to something almost dangerous. Don't make this about that. Then what is it about? Nolan heard his own voice rising. Felt heat climbing up his neck. Because she's right. You felt something that night. I saw your face when they took her away. You looked like someone had carved out part of your chest. She was a child. She was. Now she's not. Nolan moved closer. Close enough to see the muscle jumping in Levi's jaw. The way his brother's knuckles had gone white around the coffee cup. And you can't tell me you didn't feel your heart stop when you saw her standing there this morning. Levi was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something past Nolan's shoulder, something far away. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like pain. What I felt doesn't matter. You're my brother. That matters more. The words hit Nolan like a fist to the stomach because he'd been thinking the same thing. And hearing Levi say it out loud made it real in a way that was almost unbearable. They were brothers, blood, the only family either of them had left since their parents died. And now there was a woman in their barn who could destroy that with a single word. Maybe that's why she's making us choose, Nolan said quietly. Maybe she knows that neither of us would fight for her if it meant losing each other. Levi finally looked at him. Really looked at him, and Nolan saw something in his brother's eyes he'd never seen before. Desperation. Then we both say no. We tell her we can't do this. And then what? She leaves. Goes back to wherever she came from. Nolan shook his head slowly. You saw her face, Levi. She's not leaving. Not without getting what she came for. Then what do you suggest? Levi's voice had an edge again, sharp and cutting. We flip a coin, draw straws, fight for her like we're animals. Nolan opened his mouth to answer, but the sound of a door slamming outside cut him off. Both brothers turned toward the window. Through the glass, they could see movement near the corral. Someone else had arrived. A man on horseback. Dust still rising from his arrival, and he was heading straight for the barn, straight for Tessa. Levi moved first, his chair scraping back as he stood. Nolan was right behind him, both of them moving toward the door with the kind of urgency that came from instinct, from years of protecting what was theirs. But halfway across the porch, they both stopped. Because Tessa had emerged from the barn, and she was standing there watching the man approach with her arms crossed. Her posture relaxed, but her expression unreadable. The man dismounted, said something they couldn't hear from this distance, and Tessa's head tilted in that calculating way she had. She gestured toward the house, toward the brothers watching from the porch. The man turned to look at them, and even from 50 yards away, Nolan could see the hardness in his face. The way he carried himself like violence was always an option. And then Tessa said something else, something that made the man's hand move toward his belt, toward the weapon hanging there. Levi's hand found Nolan's arm gripping tight. Who is that? But Nolan didn't answer because Tessa was walking toward them. Now the man following a few steps behind, and the look on her face was the same look she'd had 18 years ago when she'd shown up bleeding and terrified at their door. The look of someone being hunted. Levi was off the porch before Nolan could stop him, his boots hitting the ground hard, eating up the distance between him and the armed stranger. Nolan followed close behind, his hand instinctively moving to his hip, where he kept a blade strapped under his shirt. The man saw them coming and shifted his stance, one hand resting near the weapon at his belt, the other hanging loose at his side. Professional, dangerous. Tessa held up her hand, stopping the brothers 10 ft away. This is Marcus Webb. He works for the Cordell family. Her voice was steady, but Nolan caught the slight tremor underneath. The way her shoulders had gone rigid. The name Cordell hit Levi like cold water. Everyone within 200 miles knew that name. Land barons, money, power. The kind of people who took what they wanted and buried anyone who objected. Nolan saw his brother's expression darken, saw the way Levi's hands curled into fists at his sides. Miss Boone here has something that belongs to the Cordell family, Marcus said, his voice flat and businesslike. Papers, documents that she took when she left their employment 3 months ago. I didn't steal anything, Tessa shot back, her eyes flashing. I took what was owed to me, wages they refused to pay. Evidence of what they did to other workers who asked for their money. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's not how Mr. Cordell sees it. He sent me to bring you back. We can do this easy or hard. Your choice. Levi took a step forward, putting himself between Marcus and Tessa. She's not going anywhere. Marcus's eyes moved to Levi, measuring him. This doesn't concern you, rancher. This is business between Miss Boone and her former employer. You're on my land. That makes it my business. Levi's voice had dropped to something cold and dangerous. The tone he used with men who tried to steal cattle or start trouble, and the lady just said, She's staying. So you can ride back and tell Mr. Cordell she's not available. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air felt thick, charged with the kind of tension that came right before violence. Nolan shifted his weight, ready to move if Marcus went for his weapon. But the man just smiled slow and knowing. You don't understand what you're getting into. Marcus said, the Cordells don't forget. They don't forgive. And they sure as hell don't let people walk away with their property. She's not property, Nolan said, his voice cutting through the tension. And whatever papers she has sounds like she earned them fair. Marcus turned his attention to Nolan, and his smile widened. Two of you? That's interesting. His gaze moved back to Tessa. You come here looking for protection? That what this is about? Tessa's face remained impassive, but Nolan saw her hands clench at her sides. I came here to settle a debt. What happens after is my concern. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge. I'm going to ride out of here. I'm going to report back that you refused to come peacefully. And then Mr. Cordell is going to send more men. A lot more men. And these two ranchers and their little piece of land won't be enough to stop what comes next. He turned toward his horse, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. You've got until tomorrow morning. After that, things get complicated. His eyes moved to the brothers. For all of you. They watched him mount up and ride away, dust rising in his wake. Nobody spoke until he was out of sight, until the only sound was wind moving through the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. Then Levi turned to Tessa, and Nolan saw something in his brother's face he recognized. The same look Levi had worn 18 years ago when he decided to hide an Apache child and risk everything. How many men will he bring? Levi asked. Tessa met his eyes. Enough. The Cordells don't make threats. They can't back up. Then we need to move you somewhere safe tonight. There is nowhere safe. Tessa's voice cracked slightly on the last word. I've been running for 3 months. They have people everywhere. Eyes in every town, every trading post. The only way to stop running is to become someone they can't touch. Nolan felt understanding. Dawn cold and heavy in his chest. That's why you need to marry one of us. A wife has legal protection. They can't take you without going through your husband first. Tessa nodded slowly. And the Cordells won't start a war over missing documents if it means killing a rancher's wife and making enemies of everyone in the territory. They're powerful, but they're not stupid. Levi ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn between anger and something that looked almost like admiration. So you came here to use us. I came here to give you what I owed you, Tessa said quietly. My life, my loyalty, my future. I just need one of you to take it before the sun sets, because tomorrow morning when Marcus comes back with his men, I need to be able to stand here as someone's wife, or I need to be gone. The brothers looked at each other, and Nolan saw his own thoughts reflected in Levi's eyes. They were being backed into a corner, forced into a choice that would change everything. But the alternative was letting her run again. Letting her die alone somewhere while they did nothing. Just like 18 years ago when they'd had to choose between safety and doing what was right. Levi spoke first, his voice rough. We need to talk alone. They walked to the far side of the corral where the horses grazed and couldn't hear what needed to be said. Levi leaned against the fence, his back to the house, his shoulders tight with tension. Nolan stood beside him, close enough to touch but feeling miles apart. The silence stretched between them like a rope being pulled taut. This changes things, Nolan said finally. Does it? Levi's voice was bitter. She still wants one of us to marry her. The reasons don't make it easier. They make it necessary. Nolan turned to face his brother. If we don't help her, she dies. You know that. You saw Marcus's face. He'll come back with enough men to take her, and we won't be able to stop them. Levi's jaw worked, his eyes fixed on the horizon. And if we do help her, one of us gets what he wants while the other has to watch, live with it every day. See her across the breakfast table knowing she could have been his. He finally turned to look at Nolan. How do we come back from that? Nolan had been asking himself the same question since Tessa appeared that morning. He didn't have a good answer. Maybe we don't. Maybe this is the price we pay for what we did 18 years ago. We saved her life, and maybe she's been carrying that weight ever since. Maybe she spent 18 years trying to figure out how to repay something that can't be repaid. Nolan paused. Olin, choosing his next words carefully. Or maybe she came back because she felt it too. What we felt? Levi closed his eyes, his hands gripping the fence rail hard enough to make the wood creak. You can't know that. I saw her face when she looked at us. She wasn't just asking for protection. There was something else there. Nolan's voice dropped lower. The question is, which one of us does she actually want? Don't. Levi's eyes snapped open. Don't make this about who she chooses, that makes it worse. Then what do? Flip a coin like you said? Let chance decide? Nolan felt frustration rising in his chest. Or do we ask her? Let her make the choice. And what if she chooses you? The words came out raw, stripped of any pretense. What if I have to stand there and watch my brother marry the woman I've been thinking about for 18 years? What if I have to smile and shake your hand and pretend my chest isn't being ripped open? Nolan felt the air leave his lungs, because Levi had just said out loud what they'd both been dancing around since dawn. The truth neither of them wanted to face. And what if she chooses me? He shot back. You think I could handle watching you with her, knowing you wanted her first? You saw her first that morning. Your hands shook when you opened the door. My hands are always steady. Not today, they weren't. They stared at each other. And Nolan saw the same desperation in his brother's eyes that was clawing at his own chest. This wasn't about protection anymore. This wasn't about deaths or duty. This was about wanting something so badly it hurt. And knowing that having it would destroy the one person who mattered most. Levi spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. What if we both say no? What if we tell her we can't do this and we help her escape some other way? Get her out of the territory before Marcus comes back. She said there's nowhere safe. They have people everywhere. Then we go with her. Both of us leave the ranch, start over somewhere they can't find us. Nolan shook his head slowly. This land is all we have left of our parents. You want to abandon that? Run away and leave everything behind. I want my brother. Levi's voice cracked. I want things to stay the way they've always been. I want to not have to choose between the woman I love and the only family I have left. The word love hung in the air between them like smoke. Nolan felt something break open in his chest. Something he'd been holding back for so long it had become part of him. You love her? Yes, Levi's admission came out defeated. I have since the day she left. Since I watched her ride away and felt like part of me was being torn out, and I've spent 18 years trying to bury it, trying to convince myself it was just guilt or responsibility or anything else. But seeing her this morning, hearing her voice, watching her stand there like she never left, he stopped, his throat working. Yes, I love her. Nolan felt tears burning behind his eyes. So do I. The brothers stood facing each other. The truth finally spoken, the weight of it pressing down like stones. Behind them, the sun had climbed higher, burning away the morning cool. Time was moving forward whether they wanted it to or not, and somewhere in the house or the barn, Tessa was waiting for an answer that would change all their lives. Levi opened his mouth to speak, but the sound of hoofbeats cut him off. Multiple horses coming fast. Both brothers turned toward the sound, and Nolan felt his stomach drop. Marcus was back, and he hadn't waited until morning. 5 riders crested the ridge, Marcus leading them. They came fast, spreading out as they approached, flanking the property like wolves circling prey. Levi counted them quickly, his mind already calculating distances, cover, how many seconds it would take to reach the house where the rifles were kept. Not enough time, not nearly enough. Nolan was already moving toward the barn where Tessa had gone. Levi grabbed his arm, holding him back. We need weapons first. We need her safe first. The riders were closer now. Close enough that Levi could see the hard faces. The way they sat their horses with the confidence of men who'd done this before. Marcus raised his hand and they slowed, forming a loose semicircle around the brothers. Dust hung in there, making everything feel hazy and unreal. Told you I'd be back, Marcus said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Didn't think it would be this soon, but Mr. Cordell was very clear. Miss Boone leaves with us today. Now Tessa appeared in the barn doorway, her dress dark against the weathered wood. She'd changed somehow in the last hour, pulled her hair back tighter, her face set in hard lines. She looked like she was preparing for battle. When she spoke, her voice carried the same edge. I already told you I'm not going. One of the riders, a man with a scar running down his cheek, laughed. Little lady doesn't get to decide. That's not how this works. Levi took a step forward, putting himself between the riders and the barn. Nolan moved to stand beside him, shoulder to shoulder. She made her choice. You need to respect that. Marcus's expression hardened. You two have about 10 seconds to step aside before this gets ugly. We don't want to hurt anyone. We just want the girl in those papers she stole. I didn't steal anything, Tessa shouted from the barn. I have proof of what the Cordells did. Names, dates, wages they refused to pay. Workers they threatened. One man they killed when he tried to organize the others. It's all written down. And if anything happens to me, copies of those documents go to every lawman within 300 menor. The words hung in the air like a threat. Marcus's jaw tightened, and Leva saw calculation flash across his face. This wasn't just about bringing back a runaway worker. This was about keeping secrets buried. That made it more dangerous. Desperate men did desperate things. "Then we'll take the papers, too," Marcus said, his hand moving to his weapon. "And we'll make sure those copies never surface." One way or another, Leva felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was going to turn violent. There was no way around it. 5 armed men against 2 ranchers and a woman with nothing but words as weapons. The math didn't work, but stepping aside wasn't an option either. Not 18 years ago when Tessa was a child, and not now. "Last chance," Marcus said. "Step aside or we go through you. Then you go through us." Levi's voice came out steady, calm, like he was discussing weather instead of his own death. Beside him, Nolan shifted his weight, ready to move. Marcus nodded slowly, like he'd expected this answer. "All right then, boys. Bring her out." The rider started to dismount, and that's when Tessa stepped fully out of the barn. She held something in her hands, a small leather case that she held up so everyone could see. "These are the documents, every piece of evidence against the Cordells. You want them? Come get them!" She started walking, not toward the riders, but toward the house. Toward the brothers. Marcus shouted something, but his words were lost in the sound of hooves as the riders moved to cut her off. Levi ran, reaching Tessa first, his arm going around her shoulders to pull her behind him. Nolan was right there, forming a barrier with his body. Theriders pulled up short, their horses snorting and stamping. They were close now. Close enough that Levi could smell sweat and leather and the metallic scent of weapons. Close enough to see the decision forming in Marcus's eyes. Themament where talking stopped and violence began. But before anyone could move, Tessa spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'll make you a deal, Marcus. You ride out of here right now, and I'll give you 3 days before I send those documents to the law. 3 days for the Cordells to pay what they owe the workers to make things right." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And why would we do that? Because in 3 days I'll be married, and my husband will have every legal right to those documents, which means if you kill me now, you'll have to kill him too. And then you'll have to kill everyone who might have seen those papers. How many bodies before the Cordells decide it's not worth it?" The math was shifting. Levi could see it happening in Marcus's face. The calculation changing. One woman was easy to make disappear. A married woman with a rancher husband was complicated, messy, witnesses, questions, the kind of attention powerful families tried to void. Marcus stared at Tessa for a long moment, then at the brothers flanking her. Finally, he spat in the dirt. 3 days after that, married or not, you're done. And these 2 ranchers won't be able to save you. He wheeled his horse around, and the others followed. They rode out fast, leaving dust and the promise of violence hanging in the air. Nobody moved until they disappeared over the ridge. Then Levi felt his legs go weak, felt the adrenaline draining out and leaving him hollow. Tessa turned to face them, the leather case still clutched in her hands. Her face was pale but determined. "I need an answer now. Which one of you is going to marry me?" The 3 of them stood in the space between the barn and the house, dust settling around them, the sun climbing higher. Nobody spoke. The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Levi looked at his brother, saw the same fear and hope and desperation he felt clawing at his own chest. Nolan's hands were trembling now, no longer trying to hide it. Tessa set the leather case down carefully, then straightened. When she looked at them, her eyes were different than they'd been all morning. Softer, sadder, like she was about to break something she couldn't fix. "I need to tell you something first about that night 18 years ago, about what really happened." Levi felt his stomach drop. "We know what happened. We hid you. Nolan got hurt protecting you. That's not all of it." Tessa's voice was quiet but steady. "After they took Nolan inside, after the men searching for me finally left, I stayed in the barn. I was terrified they'd come back, and around midnight, one of you came out to check on me." Nolan and Levi exchanged glances. Neither of them remembered that detail clearly. That night had been chaos and fear and trying to keep everyone alive. The specifics had blurred over time. He didn't say anything at first. Tessa continued, "Just sat down next to me in the hay and waited. I was crying, trying not to make noise, but failing. and to put his coat around my shoulders even though it was warm, even though I was filthy and bleeding and probably getting his coat ruined. Her voice caught slightly. Then he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "You're going to survive this. You're stronger than what happened to you. And someday you're going to come back and show everyone just how strong you are." Levi's chest tightened. He didn't remember saying those words. But standing there now, looking at the woman Tessa had become, he wanted to have said them. Wanted to have been the one who gave her that hope. And then he did something else, Tessa said, her hand moving to the scar on her jaw. He cleaned this cut. It was deep, bleeding badly. He told me it would leave a mark, that I'd carry it my whole life. And I said I didn't want Toby marked. I didn't want to remember. She paused, her eyes glistening. Hesed, don't think of it as a mark of what you lost. Think of it as proof of what you survived. Scars are just evidence that you're stronger than whatever tried to break you. Nolan made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Levi turned to look at his brother and saw tears running down Nolan's face, saw a recognition, saw memory clicking into place. It was you, Levi said quietly, the words coming out hollow. You went back that night. Nolan nodded slowly, unable to speak. His hands were shaking worse now, and he crossed his arms tight over his chest like he was trying to hold himself together. Leva felt something crack inside him, felt the careful walls he'd built around hope and wanting start to crumble. Tessa took a step toward Nolan, then another, until she was standing right in front of him, close enough to touch. You gave me those words when I had nothing else. And for 18 years, every time I looked in the mirror and saw this scar, I heard your voice telling me I was strong, telling me I'd survived, telling me I'd come back. Nolan's voice came out broken. I didn't know you remembered. I remembered everything. Tessa reached up slowly, her hand hovering near his face, waiting for permission. When he didn't pull away, she touched his cheek, her fingers gentle. I came back for you. I've always been coming back for you. Levi felt the ground shift under him, felt the future he'd been imagining all morning dissolve like smoke. This wasn't about owing a debt. This wasn't about protection or safety or legal complications. This was about a girl who'd held on to words spoken in darkness 18 years ago. This was about love that had been growing in the quiet for nearly 2 decades. He looked at his brother, at the way Nolan was staring at Tessa like she was the only thing keeping him upright. And Levick knew he'd lost, or maybe he'd never had a chance to begin with. Maybe this had been decided that night in the barn when Nolan had sat with a terrified child and given her hope instead of empty promises. Nolan. Levi's voice came out rower than he meant. His brother's eyes moved to his face, guilt and pain written across every feature. Levi swallowed hard, forced the next words out. She chose you, Levi. Nolan started, but Levi held up his hand. She chose you, he repeated, and this time it came out steadier. And you love her. So we do this right. We do it now before Marcus comes back. Before anything else can go wrong. He looked at Tessa, at the woman who'd been haunting his dreams for 18 years. You need a husband. You need protection. My brother can give you both. Tessa's eyes moved to Levi, and he saw understanding there. Saw sympathy. Saw the apology. She didn't need to speak. I'm sorry. Don't be. Levi forced something that might have been a smile. He's a better man than me anyway. Always has been. But even as he said the words, Levi felt something inside him dying. And he wondered if sacrifice always hurt this much, or if loving someone you couldn't have made it worse. They found a preacher 20 minutes away, an old man who asked no questions and agreed to perform the ceremony for a small sum. The ride there was silent. Tessa on one horse between the brothers, the leather case of documents tied securely to her saddle. Levi rode ahead, his back straight, his face unreadable. Nolan stayed close to Tessa, their horses side by side, but he didn't speak. Neither of them knew what to say. The ceremony was brief, functional. The preacher read the words in a monotone voice that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before and would do it 1,000 times more. Nolan repeated the vows, his voice steady but his hands shaking when he placed a simple ring on Tessa's finger. It had been their mother's ring, the only piece of jewelry left in the house. Levi had been the one to find it, had pressed it into Nolan's palm without a word before they left. Tessa said her vows quietly, her eyes fixed on Nolan's face. When the preacher declared them married, Nolan leaned in to kiss her. A brief touch of lips that held more promise than passion. Levi stood 3 feet away watching, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. When it was done, he signed the certificate as witness, his signature sharp and angry on the page. They rode back in the same silence, but it felt heavier now, permanent. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that looked like fire. By the time they reached the ranch, darkness had fallen, and the house stood waiting like a question they still hadn't answered. Inside, Tessa moved to the kitchen, her hands busy making coffee even though nobody had asked for it. Nolan stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression that was part wonder, part disbelief. Levi walked to the window and stared out at nothing, his shoulders rigid. "We should talk about what happens next," Tessa said, finally, her voice cutting through the silence. "Marcus will come back in 3 days. We need to be ready." "What's there to be ready for?" Levi's voice came out flat. "You're married now." That was the plan. "They can't touch you without going through your husband." He didn't turn around, didn't look at either of them. "They'll still want the documents," Nolan said quietly. "Being married doesn't make those disappear." Tessa set down the coffee pot carefully. "I'll send them to the law tomorrow." All of them. Every piece of evidence against the Cordales. Once they're in official hands, Marcus has no reason to come after me. He might come anyway. Levi said out of spite, out of pride. Men like that don't like losing. "Then we'll deal with it." Nolan's voice carried more strength now. Together, all 3 of us. Levi finally turned from the window, and the look on his face made Tessa's chest tighten. Pain, raw and unhidden. "No, not all 3 of us. 2 of you. I'll stay until we know you're safe, until Marcus is gone for good." But after that, he stopped, his throat working. "After that, I'm leaving." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Nolan took a step forward, his hand reaching out. "Levi, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Levi's voice cracked. "You think I can stay here? Watch you 2 build a life together, wake up every morning knowing she's in your bed instead of mine. See her across the table at breakfast and pretend my chest isn't being torn open?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm not that strong, Nolan. I'm not that good." Tessa moved toward him, her hand reaching for his arm, but Levi stepped back. Please don't make this harder than it already is." "I never wanted to hurt you," Tessa said, her voice breaking. "You saved my life too." "You both did. And if things were different, if I could split myself in 2, I would. But I can't. And I chose him because he was the one who sat with you that night." Levi finished for her. "Because he gave you words that mattered, I know. And I don't blame you for it." "How could I?" He finally looked at her. Really looked at her, and Tessa saw love and loss wearing in his eyes. "I just need to not be here anymore." "Can you understand that?" She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her face. "Where will you go? North? Maybe Montana? There's work up there. Land. I can start over somewhere nobody knows me. Somewhere I don't have to remember." He looked at his brother. "The ranch is yours, all of it. I'll sign whatever papers you need." "I don't want the ranch," Nolan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want my brother. You have a wife now. That's more important." Levi moved toward the door, his movement stiff and mechanical. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Give you to the house. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to handle Marcus, but after that," he paused with his hand on the door. "After that, I'm gone." He walked out before either of them could respond. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Tessa and Nolan stood in the kitchen, the space between them suddenly feeling vast and complicated. Outside, they could hear Levi's boots crossing the yard toward the barn. Nolan pulled Tessa into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, could feel the tremor in his hands. "I'm losing him," he whispered against her hair. "I'm getting everything I wanted and losing the person who matters most." Tessa held him tighter, but she didn't have words that could fix this because Nolan was right. Levi was leaving, and the space he'd leave behind would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. Some sacrifices were too big to ever really heal from. Some wounds stayed open forever, and tomorrow, when Marcus came back, they'd have to face him, knowing their small family had already been torn apart from the inside. Marcus arrived exactly 3 days later, just after dawn. But this time he came alone, his horse moving slow, his hands visible and empty. Levi saw him first from the barn where he'd spent the last 3 nights, and he walked out to meet him, his rifle held loose, but ready. Nolan emerged from the house moments later. Tessa behind him, her hand resting on her husband's back. Marcus pulled his horse to a stop 30 feet away. He looked different somehow, tired, older. When he spoke, his voice lacked the edge it had carried before. "I'm not here for trouble. Just came to deliver a message." "Then deliver it and leave," Levi said, his voice cold. "Mr. Cordell received copies of those documents 2 days ago. Every lawman in 3 territories got them at the same time." Marcus's jaw tightened. "He's finished. Federal marshals are already on their way to arrest him. His sons are fleeing. Everything's falling apart." Tessa stepped forward, her chin lifted. "Good. That's what was supposed to happen. Yeah." "Well," Marcus shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. "Before everything went to hell, Mr. Cordell gave me one last order. He wanted me to kill you. Make an example. Show people what happens when they cross the Cordells." He paused, his eyes moving between the 3 of them. "But I'm not doing it. I'm done working for men who think they can buy everything, including other people's lives." He reached into his coat slowly, and all 3 of them tensed. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was an envelope worn and sealed. "These are the original documents, the ones you said you had hidden. Mr. Cordell sent men to find them, but I intercepted them first. Figured you'd want them back." He tossed the envelope, and it landed in the dirt between them. Nobody moved to pick it up. Marcus studied their faces for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You 3 take care, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry about all this." He turned his horse and rode away, leaving nothing but dust and the sound of hoof beats fading into morning. When he was gone, Tessa picked up the envelope, her hands shaking slightly. She opened it, checked the contents, then looked up at the brothers with tears in her eyes. "It's over.
We're safe."
But the relief in her voice was tempered by something else, because they all knew that one threat ending didn't fix what had been broken between them. Levy set his rifle down and walked back toward the barn without a word. Nolan started to follow, but Tessa caught his arm, holding him back. "Let me," she said quietly. She found Levi in the barn packing his few belongings into saddlebags. His movements were efficient, practiced like he'd done this before, like leaving was something he knew how to do. Tessa stood in the doorway watching him for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to go now. The threat is over. The threat from Marcus is over." Levi didn't look at her, didn't stop packing. "The threat to my sanity isn't. Levi, please don't." Heffenly turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her step back. "Don't ask me to stay and watch you love my brother. Don't ask me to pretend I'm fine. I gave you both my blessing because it was the right thing to do, because he deserves you, because you chose him. But that doesn't mean I can stay here and survive it." Tessa felt tears burning her eyes. "I wish things were different." "So do I," Levi's voice softened slightly. "But they're not. And the kindest thing I can do for all of us is leave. Let you build your life without me haunting it." He picked up his saddlebags, walked past her toward his horse. "Tell Nolan. Tell him I love him. Tell him this isn't his fault. And tell him to take care of you, or I'll hear about it and come back. Where will you go?" "North Montana. Like I said, maybe further somewhere I can forget what it feels like to want something I can't have." He secured his bags to the horse, then mounted up. For a moment he sat there looking down at her, memorizing her face one last time. "You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever feel. Thank you for that, even if it hurts like hell to lose it." Then he was gone, riding away from the ranch, from his brother, from the life he'd built. Tessa stood watching until he disappeared over the ridge, until there was nothing left but empty horizon and the ache in her chest. Nolan found her there, slipped his arms around her waist from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. "He's really gone." He had to go. Staying would have destroyed him. They stood together in silence, watching the place where Levi had disappeared. The sun was climbing higher now, warming the land, promising a new day. Around them, the ranch waited, the house they'd share, the land they'd work, the future they'd build together. But it would always be marked by the absence of the man who'd sacrificed everything so they could have it. "We'll make it worth it," Nolan said quietly. "His sacrifice. We'll build something good here, something that honors what he gave up." Tessa turned in his arms, looked up at her husband's face, saw the determination there mixed with grief. "We will. And someday maybe he'll come back. When it doesn't hurt so much, when he's found his own peace. Maybe." Nolan didn't sound convinced, But he kissed her anyway, soft and careful, like she was something precious he was still learning to hold. Come on, we have work to do, a ranch to run, a life to start. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, leaving the barn and its memories behind. The documents that had brought Tessa back were already on their way to people who could use them for justice. Marcus and the Cordals were finished. The danger was over, but the cost of their safety would echo through every day they spent together. Every moment of happiness tinged with the knowledge of what Levy had given up to make it possible. Some stories didn't have perfect endings. Some victories required sacrifices that could never be repaid. But they would try anyway. They would build a life worth the price that had been paid. And they would carry Levi with them in every choice they made, every day they lived, every moment they loved each other. Because that's what family did. They carried each other even when the weight was almost too much to bear. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and impossible choices reshape destinies in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.